Hello. If you are anything like me back in the day, you would have been using a machine like this for a very long time, mostly because you couldn't afford to upgrade it to anything better. That all the people around you were probably moving on as tech advanced, but I often found myself in the situation where I would be using offcasts that other people had sold on. I remember buying people's old used Voodoos and things like a long time after they were current, just because I couldn't afford anything better. And to be honest, I wasn't really that bothered. I was playing all of the games I loved. The good thing was that DOS games were getting cheaper. I wasn't that bothered about I remember it was a long time before I moved on to Windows 95, and probably longer till I moved further on to Windows 98. And I remember XP, not being able to afford that when it came out. I think the first OS I actually bought was Windows ME. So you could have found yourself maybe even going into the early 2000s still sitting on a machine like this DX266 and happily playing your DOS games. But occasionally something comes along that forces you to want to move, and in my case it was the internet. I heard about it, I needed to get on it, so yeah, I had to move on. I mean, it is possible there were DOS browsers, I believe, but it wasn't something I was particularly familiar with or heard much about, and you couldn't really appreciate being online the way it was designed to be if you tried to do that. So yeah, eventually it's time to move on to a new machine. But you can't afford a new PC, so you wait and you think about saving, but then somebody comes and says, you know what, you can buy my old PC off me, and then you can move into the modern world and you'll be able to browse the internet on it. So you might end up with something like this, discarded from somebody's home office. This is the PC that was in last week's video, in case you were wondering, but just imagine. Things are a little different from your normal DOS setup that you're used to, but after buying a few magazines and going onto a few of the newfangled internet sites to ask some questions, you find out that this Windows 98 has basic Sound Blaster emulation for effects, and for music you can choose this built-in synthesizer that will mimic the fabulousness of the wavetable board that you had on your original sound card. So you're all set up, you set it all up and get ready to play some DOS games. So this particular machine has a SoundMax AC97 chip on it. It's Intel 810 chipset. Now everything's configured, ready to play some Doom. So after a lot of mooching around, it's that's not the quality of sound that you're quite accustomed to. So you fiddle around with it for a bit and you can't get it any better, but then you think, oh, it's no problem, I've still got my old sound card, I'll put that in. So you open up the machine, things look a little bit different from what they used to on your 486, and you get your trusty sound card out with its wavetable header on, think this is going to save my DOS gaming and I'll be able to browse the internet at the same time. And then you realise times really have moved on because the slots have all changed and your fabulous sound card doesn't fit anymore. So because you've got the internet now, there's a world of information at your fingertips, and you start looking for a sound card that fits in one of these newfangled PCI slots that might work with your DOS games. And the first one that comes up is a card from ALS, the ALS 4000. There's the C-Media 8738. There's the Ensoniq based sound cards like the Sound Blaster PCI 128. There's the Sound Blaster Live, which seems to be what everybody's using at the minute. There's the Solo-1 from ESS. And there are two cards that are more real, the Vortex and the Vortex 2. And finally you have from Yamaha the YMF 744. So these are the cards that you've found information on that says that you can get a mixture of Windows and DOS gaming out of to certain degrees. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. Some of them you can only use wavetable to load sound fonts in to emulate your MIDI. Some of them have various methods of implementing real MIDI. So Which one should you choose? You need to get those sounds back for your DOS games, otherwise the world will end. So you go charging off to your nearest local computer superstore, back in the day when they were full of computer stuff instead of televisions and washing machines like they are now. And you peruse the shelves looking for the saviour of your machine that will get your favourite DOS games up and running again in this awful Windows environment. And what you come home with, partly because it's one of the cheaper ones, is the ESS Solo-1. So will this be the saviour of your DOS gaming on this newfangled Windows machine that you just received second-hand? So this card's from Teratech, a Pro Media 128, and it's based on the ESS Solo-1 sound chip, and it has some interesting features. There are a few different versions of this. The one that I showed in the picture earlier, you might have noticed, had a wavetable header, but this one doesn't. But it does have the blank sort of socket, but it's all filled in with solder. So yeah, shame you won't be able to use your wavetable header on this little puppy. So what this particular version does have is a SB link, and that allows you to plug into a board that supports DMA. Tend to be earlier boards like the Intel BX chipset, ironically mostly on boards that have an ISA slot. So you know, you try, if you've got an ISA slot and you want to do DOS gaming, you just use an ISA card, wouldn't you? But yeah, SB link is on here, but the board that we've got doesn't have an SB link socket, so we can't use it. And why did I have a jeweler's drill up then? You'll find out shortly. But yeah, this is the picture I showed earlier. This is a slightly different model. This is also a Teratech one, but you can see this one doesn't have the SB link, but does have a wavetable header. And apparently that's the way they sold them. You either got one with a wavetable header or you got one with an SB link, but not both. To cut a long story short, things didn't go well on this machine. So on the face of it, the BIOS seems to have a lot of support. It's got legacy ISA support. You can set up the DMA and the IRQs that you want assigned, the memory addresses and everything you want to reserve specifically for the ISA emulation, and that looked promising initially. And of course the issue with PCI cards in DOS is all to do with being able to access DMA and IRQs directly, which ISA could do, but in PCI world it isn't that simple. And what I found, or what I think I found, is the board has to have some kind of legacy DMA support, and there are a couple of ways of doing it. So DMA is direct memory access, and the sound cards need that to move their data between the RAM and the actual card, and it has to do it without taking too much toll on the CPU. So if you don't have DMA, you'll get things disappearing on you, like your sound effects, and music might drop in and out and that kind of thing. And then your sound card needs a decent DOS emulator as well, so it needs to do some Sound Blaster emulation for DOS using some kind of legacy driver, which not all cards have. And that's why that list isn't huge. You can't just shove any PCI card in and expect it to work. There are only a few that have got the correct drivers, but that isn't the end of the story. It's to do with the motherboards and the chipsets as well, and whether or not they support any kind of DMA. So there's two forms of that. There's one called DDMA support, which I think is direct DMA, and then there's another one called TDMA, which I think emulates it in software. And both of those, theoretically, it paired with a legacy driver, should theoretically give you some noise. And here are the files that we're interested in. So these are all of the DOS drivers and Windows drivers that get dumped into your C drive. I experimented a lot with these and moved them into different positions because I wasn't getting any kind of decent results. I was getting no sound, and there's various sites like Phil's Computer Lab has a pretty good guide on just setting it up in DOS. So I don't want to set it up in just DOS. I want to be able to run Windows 98 and they also drop into DOS to play my DOS games, which is the kind of scenario that you would have wanted back in the day, rather than just loading a pure DOS system. And yeah, so I tried it in a few different combinations, putting things in different folders, trying different sets of drivers. And looking in our device manager, you can see that you get everything you think you'd need with the ESS Solo, which is why we went out and bought it in the first place. You can see where it's set its resources. Everything's as standard, except it uses IRQ5, where some sound blasters would use IRQ7. You just have to remember that. And it's got the legacy DOS emulation, so it should all be good. And we've also got all of that ISA legacy stuff in the BIOS as well. That kind of implies that you've got everything you need. Off we went, giving it a go. So I went through every kind of permutation of everything apart from success with this machine. So I had it hanging on me. As you started Doom, it would just hang, go back like that. I got it working with music. This is just using the ESS onboard FM synth, which is a kind of hardware emulation. I think it does it in a microcontroller, and it is pretty good. It's getting so much better than that GS synth that we tried before when we used the onboard sound, but no sound effects. And then after trying pretty much everything under the sun, no sound at all, and I couldn't figure my way out of this. So configuring stuff in DOS is a real pain in the arse, to be quite honest. So you've got your autoexec.bat and your config sys, which get configured by Windows as you install the drivers. And then you obviously want to add a bunch of extra stuff if you want to run things in DOS mode. So you want to put your set blaster and any other little apps like the mixer here that came with the ESS drivers. And it's just a pain, because when you change something, every time you reboot, Windows will overwrite it back to the way that it thinks it should be. If you want to add anything extra in, it needs to go into this DOS start file, which is a little extra folder where you can put in custom DOS configurations so that you can add things that won't get wiped by Windows every time you reboot. But I actually found that Windows will wipe your DOS start as well, so it does work. You can make changes, but you have to set it to read only when you're finished. It's the right path. The more I thought about it, though, it isn't really what you want to be doing. If back in the day, if you moved up to Windows 98 machine in that scenario, but you still wanted to play your DOS games, you wouldn't want to be dicking around with your config sys. You had enough of that for the last 10 years. You just want to click on your games in Windows 95 and play. So that's what we're going to try and configure the system for, and we're not going to mess around with any DOS start files or anything else for that matter. We're just going to get it working in Windows 98. So by this point in the proceedings, I was getting pretty disillusioned, and I laid the blame at the foot of this machine. And after some consultation with the oracle that is ChatGPT, came to the conclusion that this MSI board, which runs on the Intel 810 chipset, is not a particularly good candidate for legacy DMA support. I don't think it was particularly well known for it. There were some particular chipsets that were. So you're talking mostly from VIA, who had a very good rep for maintaining DOS support, and they had their own VIA DOS drivers for their own onboard sound and things like that. So that went on quite a while. I was actually struggling in my collection to find chipsets that were immediately compatible. I dug this one out of the cupboard. It is a similar PC to the IBM. It's got no AGP, it's just got a bunch of PCI slots. And this one is a gigabyte motherboard, but also runs on the Intel 810. But since I had it out, I gave it a quick go and didn't really get much further. In my head, that just kind of confirmed that the Intel 810 chipset, there it is, little twat, does not like a lot of these legacy DOS PCI sound cards, so put that away. So this video should have been done weeks ago, but I was running through all of this stuff. I found another board. This was ASRock K7S41GX, and this runs on the SIS 41GX chipset. So I decided to give that one a go and didn't get anywhere with that either. And basically it turns out SIS has a very hit and miss reputation with this kind of thing as well. So it's really VIA are the ones to go for if you want to do this kind of thing reliably and know that you've got a fighting chance of making it work. But even then, only via chipsets up to a certain point. Beyond that, they drop their DMA support. So yes. Now those machines were earlier than this machine you're looking at here. They were Pentium 3, socket 370s and socket A, but I suddenly looked down and saw a VIA chipset in my main test rig, which is a Pentium 4, so this later machine. I thought, I just wonder. So I thought I'll give it a go anyway, even though I didn't have much in the way of hope. And this one uses an ECS P4VMM2 motherboard, and it runs on a VIA P4M266A chipset. So socket 478, and yeah, it'd be quite cool if you can get something so late running well on DOS, but we can only try. I was dubious because the south bridge on this particular chipset is beyond where the cutoff was for VIA doing DOS support for the onboard sound, so this does not support the VIA DOS drivers, which is a shame. Initially, the drivers are installed, and out the box, this is using the actual TerraTech install disk, which I found on archive.org, which is quite cool. You get a couple of choices when you look in your available sound devices. So we just got the ESS, that'll be the Sound Blaster emulation, and in the MIDI we've got the ESS FM, which is the hardware Sound Blaster music emulation, and we've also got the MPU 401 for any external MIDI devices. This loaded the drivers up in the C drive in a similar way to the way we saw on the IBM, except I'm not going to mess with them. I'm not going to add any other drivers or anything. We'll either make these work or we'll die trying. And I'm going to tell you now, it all worked eventually. It did take a little bit of work. I'm not going to play you any sounds right now. What we'll do is we'll play out at the end with the comparison of the ESS FM and the other options that we've got going. But yeah, got it working with the FM out of the box like this, which was cool. The next thing I wanted to do was look at the actual card. After a bit of mooching around the internet, I found out that a few people have actually modded these cards and retrofitted a wavetable header in. Thought it'd be cool to have a card with both a wavetable header and an SB link. That's why I got this drill out, because initially I thought, solder is soft, I should just be able to drill through rather than go through the pain of trying to get the solder plugs out with solder wick or whatever. This drill business didn't really work very well. I would have been there for the next month probably if I kept on trying to do that. I don't know whether the solder just gone hard over time or whatever, but yeah, it was reluctant to come away with the drill, so I broke out the soldering iron and some wick. And surprisingly, it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. You can see that it is actually sucking some of those holes clean pretty easily, so I'm not going to make you endure the whole ordeal, but I just steadily went along them and eventually we ended up with this. So I was pretty pleased with that. Give it a little bit of a clean, get rid of the flux, and the next thing was to find some header thingy-jigs to put in. Luckily I bought a box on Amazon for just this purpose, so the board's ready and all we have to do is find the correct connector. And I'll tell you now, this worked as well, so you'll hear this in the sound card comparisons as well. There were a few other things I learned along the way. Having too much memory, this being a Pentium 4, had 2 gigs of RAM in it. We know that Windows 98 doesn't like more than 512 megs. I did put the patch on that allows you to have more, but sound cards are still temperamental with this, and for a long time it wasn't working correctly. But as soon as I set this and limited it to 512 in the settings, it was fine. So that's something to bear in mind if you try to do this. You'll need to do it in a couple of places. You need to do it in here where you're gonna set the limit to 512 in system config, and also you might want to go into the individual game, the game exe settings, the memory tab in the properties there, and make sure that everything matches whatever it is that your game should be addressing. I mean, the whole thing is quite a tricky thing, because on top of that there were issues with individual games. So the three that I'm going to test is Dark Forces, Dune II and Doom. And Doom was the only one that was happy out the box. Like, it turned out that Dark Forces has a thing called iMuse, which is the little utility that it uses to allow you to set your sound settings, as we see here. And in some versions of the game that were released, including mine, this was bugged. So when you were setting things, clicking on test music would hang, and it just kept on crashing, and it wouldn't play music and whatever, and I couldn't figure out why it was crashing. Bit of googling, found out that it's a known problem, and it has been addressed by some community hacks, I think, not by LucasArts themselves. So I don't know how they got around this back in the day. Just told you to not use MIDI, perhaps, I don't know. But yeah, to get the MIDI working, you had to run a patch. There are a few of these around on the net, or a couple at least. The one that I'm using is called Dark Forces Dehacker, and it isn't just a thing that fixes the iMuse, it actually updates the controls and a whole bunch of stuff. It doesn't change the game itself, it just sort of updates it for running a bit better on modern systems of modern peripherals. But I was only interested in getting the iMuse working so that I could go in and try and set my MIDI device. It worked, so you'll hear the results of that a bit later. But once you've clicked this little box at the bottom where it says to enable the iMuse hack, that's all you have to do. And then as soon as you do that, it puts its stuff into, updates a bunch of the config files in your Dark Forces folder, and you're good to go. Similar kind of thing with Dune II. Dune II, depending on which version you get, it will either allow you to set your devices separately for your sound effects and your music, or it won't. And after you run the patch, you actually get three choices. So you initially, before I ran the patch, you got this screen only, so it let you set your sound blaster. But if you set MT32, you lost all your sound effects and just got music or sound canvas or whatever. But after the patch, you get another page which just plays sound effects, and then even further into that you get yet another page which is for playing digital samples. So a very thorough choice of sound sources, and that sorted that out too, so we could use the variety of things at our disposal to play music and do our comparison. So that's pretty much it for the video, though it should have actually been 4 choices to compare here, but we're only actually going to do 2. So the playout comparison is going to be between the wavetable daughter board and the ESS FM, which are the two sort of basic choices. The other choices we should have had was there are actually sound fonts for this card, but I could not get them working with anything, basically. Kind of gave up after a while. The other option should have been to run the card with the Microsoft GS soft synth, which I did record, but I made a hash of it because I left my mic channel open on my what do you call it, my screen grabber while I was doing it, so you got this horrible echo like this. But even if it wasn't echoing, we've heard that earlier in the video, and the Microsoft GS soft synth on Windows 98 is a pretty nasty sounding thing, so we kind of saved ourselves some pain with that. It's a bit of a shame we couldn't get the wavetable working, but yeah, that's it. We're going to play out just comparing the ESS FM synth, which worked fine, and the wavetable header worked fine. The particular wavetable card I've got, it was very quiet. I turned it up as loud as I could in the mixer. It's quieter than you would want it to be. I think it might just be the model of card I've got, though I think it was generally an issue with some of them anyway, but it's okay. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching if you made it this far, and we'll just play out with a comparison of those 3 games in each mode. And yeah, I think we finally got it working with a lot of fiddling. So those DOS games, our favourite DOS games, can be played in Windows 95. Yay!
known as Dune. Land of sand. Home of the spice melange. The spice controls the empire. Whoever controls Dune controls the spice. The Emperor has proposed a challenge to each of the houses.
The house that produces the most spice will control Dune. There are no set territories and no rules of engagement.
Vast armies have arrived. Now, 3 houses fight for the soul of Dune. The noble Atreides. The insidious orders.